Welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. In this one, there's some pretty big news. So AMD's USB dropout issue finally being addressed. Not just talked about by AMD, but there's an AGESA update that's supposed to come out and hopefully start resolving the intermittent USB dropout issue that many of you have posted about over the past couple of months now. Nvidia and its crypto mining lawsuit dismissed. This one's been going on for a couple of years. AMD's working on Epyc CPUs, new ones for March at this point. And there's also a Ryzen 5000 stock update alongside some other stories. Before that, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is what we've been using for years to manage our own Gamers Nexus store, and we've been incredibly happy with the choice. Squarespace makes e-commerce easy for those interested in starting stores, but it also has powerful tools to build all types of websites. Photo galleries for photographers, resume and portfolio sites, and small business sites are all easily done through Squarespace. Having built a lot of client websites the old way before running GN full-time, we can easily recommend Squarespace as a powerful, fast solution. Go to squarespace.com/gamersnexus to get 10% off your first purchase with Squarespace. Quick GN store update first. So mouse mats and toolkits are still in stock. This we're actually really proud to talk about because it took us months to sort of figure out demand and supply chain stuff and also build up money because you do have to pay for the product in order to order it. So anyway, it's taken us quite a while, but we've finally gotten ahead of the demand a little bit, and we've now been in stock for mouse mats and toolkits for probably a bit over a month at this point. So really happy about that. The sell-through rate's pretty high, but we were able to actually get ahead. If you've wanted one, they're on store.gamersnexus.net. It looks like we're probably gonna run out before the next stock, but we've had them in for a little while at this point. So thanks for your patience on letting us figure all that out. We can now say that we have better stock of our mouse mats and toolkits than billion-dollar companies have of their products. So let's hope we can keep it that way. All right, first real story. AMD fixing USB dropout issues. This is sort of a big deal. If you aren't up to speed on this, basically for a couple months now, particularly with the X5, with the 500 series AMD chipset motherboards, but also with some other ones, and particularly with Zen 3, but also with other versions of Zen, there have been issues where USB devices will drop out of connectivity with the system intermittently during use. And this has been traced back to a few different things by the community, but AMD hasn't said anything, including now with this update, that firmly identifies the specific exact root cause. It has said that it thinks it found the root cause and has given some basics, but nothing that would give you a hard understanding of where the root cause of the dropout is. The reason this has been a problem, other than annoying things like your mouse dropping out while using it, is particularly for people who are using things like external drives that are connected via USB. You can suffer data loss or corruption as a result of that. Or for people who are using external audio devices, this has been a major dropout problem as well. And there's been issues like audio crackling, which AMD has addressed in this new update it posted on its subreddit. So in mid-February, so about a month ago, AMD posted on the AMD subreddit and publicly acknowledged that it's heard the concern about USB dropout issues, and it was working on trying to identify the problem. It claimed that the problem affected a small number of users. Not really sure how true that is, but it also was seeking assistance from the community in providing log files from failures, specific system configurations, things of that nature to identify the problem. So fast forward to today, and AMD has now posted an update on the AMD subreddit as well, stating that it thinks it has found the root cause and that it has an AGESA binary push that should fix the issue. AMD's post states that the company, quote, believes it has isolated the root cause and developed a solution that addresses a range of reported symptoms. It said that USB port dropout, USB 2.0 audio crackling with DAC and AMP combos, and USB or PCIe Gen 4 exclusion were among those. And to go back to the original story, PCIe Gen 4 specifically was one of the toggles people could flip to try and resolve the issue on their own system. Bringing it down to Gen 3, for example, apparently helped some people in the community, but not everyone from what we've seen. So it sounds like a really screwy issue to try and diagnose. AMD says that AGESA version 1.2.0.2 will fix the dropout issue, or at least the symptoms for some of these failures. It was pretty careful with its wording, but for anyone unaware, AGESA is a collective name for the binary that AMD issues to its motherboard partners. So AGESA is a package of code that's included in BIOS or firmware updates. The motherboard vendors take that, for example, the entire AMD overclocking section of BIOS that has all the subsections for things like VDDG, for example, that is made by AMD and provided to the partners. That's why it's exactly the same from one motherboard to the next. So the update is in AGESA. This does mean that the motherboard partners have to roll the new AGESA into their various motherboard BIOSes and firmware updates. And it's possible that some deprecated boards won't get the update, but it seems like the boards that are affected should all still be on the actively supported list. And none of the motherboard manufacturers making these boards have gone out of business in the last year, so you should be supported at this point. AMD said, quote, customers can expect downloadable BIOSes containing AGESA 1.2.0.2 to begin with beta updates in early April. The exact update schedule for your system will depend on the test and implementation schedule for your vendor and specific motherboard model. If you continue to experience intermittent USB connectivity issues after updating your system to 1.2.0.2, we encourage you to download the standalone AMD bug report tool and open a ticket with AMD customer support. The next story is on Nvidia's crypto mining lawsuit that it's been going through for the past couple of years. So at the end of 2019 and early parts of 2020, Nvidia found itself in a cryptocurrency related lawsuit stemming back to something that investors claimed affected them in 2017 and 2018. And the allegations were that Nvidia was misleading investors by obfuscating the proportion of revenue from GPUs sold for mining as opposed to GPUs sold for gaming, because it's all GeForce cards anyway, so it's maybe easier to obfuscate with this particular product than with other ones. The lawsuit claimed that Nvidia was masking over $1 billion in crypto mining revenue as gaming revenue from its GeForce lineup. The investor claims point to Nvidia's then booming gaming segment as potentially unsustainable if the cryptocurrency bubble burst. This was a different time. It's come back, obviously. That's not exactly how it panned out, but both AMD and Nvidia did, and their partners in particular, suffer from excess supply at one point. You look at the RTX 20 series launch when the GTX 10 series was still somewhat readily available, and everyone's recommending 10 series cards, especially because there were no RTX titles for at least 50 to 55 days after launch of the cards named RTX. So this was something that affected the supply, namely oversupply, of the previous Pascal generation at the time for the partners and for Nvidia, and then of course Polaris for AMD or whatever was working on Vega. As of Tuesday, March 9th, 2021, though, a U.S. District Court judge officially tossed the case out, and this netted Nvidia an important win. The fulcrum of the case was the inability of plaintiffs to provide evidence that Nvidia misled investors in 2017 and 2018, since that's what the entire lawsuit hinged on. It was absolutely no secret that GeForce cards were, and still are, an extremely popular fare among miners. And that shouldn't have been a secret to investors either. That fact seems to have set the tone for the case, and any future investor suits involving Nvidia, AMD, or crypto will have to try harder than this one. So up next, some AMD news. This is AMD Epyc news. It's server side, but typically the Threadripper, HEDT, or high-end desktop stuff comes out not too long after AMD Epyc announcements. So AMD sent out news that it's planning to host a digital launch event for its upcoming Epyc CPU release, and these have long gone by the name Milan. The code name internally is Milan, and according to AMD's press release, the event will feature the usual presentations from high-ranking AMD executives, including CEO Dr. Lisa Su and CTO Mark Papermaster, among others, to talk about the Milan processors. Milan is set to succeed AMD's current line of Epyc Rome processors and will be socket and pin compatible with not only Rome, but also the earlier Naples platform. Not a whole lot is known about AMD's Milan cores yet, other than they'll be based on Zen 3, which should afford a notable IPC gain on its own. Milan will also use one of TSMC's N7 process nodes and will feature up to 64 cores and 128 PCIe lanes. As usual, AMD is targeting 1 and 2 socket systems with Epyc Milan, and we'll know more on Monday, March 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern or 8 a.m. Pacific for US time zones. Samsung also had an SSD announcement this week. This one is for the 980 NVMe SSD. It's Samsung's first entry-level NVMe SSD of this performance class. Also the first SSD in quite a while to drop the 3-letter suffix at the end of it. It's just 980. Keeping it simple, not following the Intel path of naming, or, well, Intel's not the only one at this point. Either way, this brings a few notables for Samsung. This is Samsung's first SSD to make use of a DRAM-less controller. For example, Samsung is billing the 980 SSD as something of a successor to its 970 EVO, but it's dropped the three-letter branding. As of this writing, there's already a number of reviews available, so you check those out if you want to know more details, but we'll briefly go through some of the specs. The 980 SSD uses a PCIe Gen 3x4 NVMe 1.4 interface and uses 128-layer TLC NAND flash, according to Samsung's own announcements. As previously stated, the SSD uses that DRAM-less controller we mentioned, and instead it relies on the NVMe Host Memory Buffer, or HMB feature, to connect the SSD to a very small portion of system DRAM. The Samsung 980 SSD will come in three capacities: 250 GB, 500 GB, and 1 TB. The sequential read and write speeds are up to 3,500 or 3,000 megabytes per second, depending on the model and capacity. Likewise, random read and write speeds are up to 500,000 IOPS or 480,000 IOPS, depending on the model. Endurance comes in at 600 TBW for 1 TB, 300 for 500 GB, and 150 TBW for 250 GB. Each model is covered with a 5-year warranty, with prices starting at $50 for 250 gig, $70 for 500, and $130 for 1 TB. It's time for another market share report. There are, as we discussed last week, a couple of major analyst firms in the industry. There's John Petty Research, or JPR, Mercury, IDC, there's Gartner, probably a couple we're forgetting here as well. But Gartner is the one that is relevant for this particular week, and that's because Gartner put out a report talking about PC growth and shipments and how they're currently riding an all-time high, to the surprise of nobody watching this channel. So for fourth quarter of 2020, total PC shipments numbered 74.9 million, according to Gartner's reports. So for the fourth quarter of 2020, total PC shipments totaled 79.4 million, according to Gartner, which is apparently a 10.7% increase quarter over quarter. Annually, PC shipments totaled 275 million units for 2020, which Gartner says is a 4.8% increase year over year, and the most growth the PC market has seen in a decade now. Quote, the worldwide PC market saw a strong finish to 2020, recording a third consecutive quarter of growth year over year, although there continued to be supply shortages due to this high demand. Robust consumer PC demand again drove sales, particularly in regions where governments maintain stay-at-home orders as the pandemic persists. Prior to 2020, consumers had been shifting to a phone-first focus, yet the pandemic reversed this trend. PCs have resurfaced as an essential device for consumers, including younger children, relying on them to work, go to school, socialize, and be entertained from their homes. As usual, the major OEMs remained in the top 3 spots for vendors. That includes Lenovo, HP, and Dell for pre-built system providers. Gartner noted that all vendors, including Asus, Apple, Acer, and a couple others, managed to grab more market share this year as well, as a result of the increased demand. Gartner didn't include the sales numbers of Chromebooks in its research. It did, however, note that it was a record year for Chromebook sales, and it specifically pointed towards educational use and acquisition as a reason for driving Chromebook sales. And this is something that JPR reported last week as well, and we talked about that in our previous video. Gartner expects this growth and demand to remain for at least the first half of 2021. But beyond that, the sustainability will depend on how many current trends remain in place, like virtual learning and remote work. For the last couple of weeks, we've talked about weather events around the world affecting the PC industry. So one of them in Taiwan, there's been droughts this past season for them, and that's led to companies like TSMC importing water to continue manufacturing. In Texas, there's a problem of shutdowns to preserve the integrity of the electrical grid as a result of the rolling blackouts that were planned to try and deal with the winter weather event that happened a couple weeks ago now. So we're starting to finally get a better picture as to what the semiconductor plant shutdowns in Texas actually mean for the industry at this point, and that's for the market at large and for the companies. DigiTimes is reporting that the disruption in production at Samsung's Texas facilities will affect its PCIe SSD controller supply and its output. Quote, Samsung Electronics has notified clients that production of its PCIe SSDs is being disrupted by tight supplies of controller chips, with the production unlikely to restore until May, according to market sources, says DigiTimes. Tom's Hardware also reported on this, talking about how Samsung doesn't produce NAND flash for its SSDs in Texas, but saying it does produce the chips that power its controllers there. And Digitimes expanded on this, saying that Samsung has reported up to 75% of its PCIe SSD controller production will be affected this month. As of this writing, the Austin American-Statesman is reporting that Samsung's Texas fab is still offline. Countering the negative news about supply and availability, there's some positive news. PC World and friend of the site Gordon Ma-Un reported on Ryzen 5000 series availability over this past week, and specifically pointed out that it seems like Ryzen 5000 CPU availability has hit a turning point. The outlet has been monitoring retailers' stock on Ryzen 5000 CPUs, and PC World reported that Amazon has been able to keep stock of the Ryzen 7 5800X and Ryzen 5 5600X and at MSRP prices. As noted by PC World's Gordon Ma-Un, the higher-end Ryzen 9 5900X and 5950X CPUs continue to be elusive, coming in and out of stock sporadically, but Gordon reached out to AMD for an update on stock and inventory and received the following positive news. Quote from AMD to PC World, "We have shipped a significant volume of Ryzen 5000 CPUs and are shipping out additional stock on a daily basis. We're also refreshing the stock of AMD Ryzen 5000 series processors and Radeon RX 6000 series graphics cards on AMD.com on a weekly basis, giving gamers and enthusiasts a direct option to purchase the latest Ryzen CPUs and Radeon GPUs at the suggested e-tail and retail price." And for more of this report, check out PC World's write-up. You can also check out their YouTube channel. They do I think it's weekly podcast at this point, and always a lot of fun. Gordon and his team do great work, so happy to recommend them if you're looking for another source of news. Up next, Intel working with DARPA to build silicon for its new DPRIVE program. Little does the government know, we've been deprived of silicon for quite some time now. So other than perhaps an unfortunate acronym or initialism, the DPRIVE program is aimed at data protection in virtual environments, hence the name, and Intel is partnering with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency to work on this. Specifically, they're looking at introducing the DPRIVE program to aim at developing a custom hardware accelerator for fully homomorphic encryption, or FHE compute. FHE is the process of running calculations and computations on fully encrypted data or data sets, meaning that the data never has to be decrypted in the process. It's much less susceptible, in theory, to compromise or exposure. FHE has huge implications for the future of machine learning, for AI, and for neural networks. And while FHE isn't new altogether, it also isn't viable with current hardware. DARPA's program manager, Tom Rondeau, said, quote, "A computation that would take a millisecond to complete on a standard laptop would take weeks to compute on a conventional server running FHE today." For its part, Intel plans to develop a custom ASIC, as well as developing the underlying IP blocks and software stack that'll eventually lead to an SoC design to enable better FHE performance in the cloud, whatever that means in this context. Intel states that once fully realized, the ASIC design could improve FHE workload execution performance by 5 orders of magnitude compared to existing CPU-based systems. Microsoft will also be part of the DPRIVE program, providing the cloud computing ecosystem and infrastructure. The DPRIVE program is set to span several years and phases, and Intel and Microsoft will be working with global standards bodies in an effort to develop international standards for FHE. Speaking of Microsoft, Microsoft has also announced that it's officially closed on its acquisition of ZeniMax Media. This will see Microsoft bringing in all of ZeniMax's subsidiaries, including historic studios like Bethesda Softworks and id Software. Other development studios include ZeniMax Online Studios, Arcane, Machine Games, Tango Gameworks, AlphaDog, and Roundhouse Studios. Unsurprisingly, Microsoft's Phil Spencer confirmed that some new Bethesda games in the future, quote, will be exclusive to Xbox and PC players, leaving out PlayStation. Of course, Spencer stopped just short of saying exactly which future games would be exclusive, but Microsoft has already clarified that existing exclusive contracts, like Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo for the PS5, will be honored, and that games for other systems will still be supported. Spencer also noted that, quote, "This is the next step in building an industry-leading first-party studios team, a commitment we have to our Xbox community." From day one leading into the new Xbox launch, it was fairly obvious that Microsoft was trying to lean in this direction. Perhaps it sees what Nintendo's been doing well for years, which is to provide exclusives or first-party titles that make the hardware almost irrelevant as a factor, as people just want to play the specific games. It looks like this is the direction Microsoft is trying to head, and in fact, it's basically said as much. And to celebrate this acquisition and the closing out of it, Microsoft just made a slew of Bethesda games available on Xbox Game Pass, including several games from the Doom, Fallout, and Elder Scrolls franchises. Also in the news this week, Puget Systems, builders of custom and often high-end workstations and servers, released some interesting sales data as it pertains to systems that the company has built and shipped. According to the data, AMD CPUs now account for more than 50% of the machines built at Puget. Puget notes that it quietly dropped AMD CPUs from its build operations back in 2015, with the reason being that Intel offered better performing chips and there was a declining interest in AMD CPUs from customers. Today, Puget Systems data suggests that Ryzen 3000 was the primary turning point, as 2019 saw a significant uptick in AMD-based builds at Puget. The company's graph shows 100% Intel utilization until about October of 2017, which is similar to the sales data we previously published from our own affiliate sales information, where we saw something like a 97 or a 93% to the remainder for Intel to AMD. The AMD representation remained under 10% until about late 2019 to early 2020, and within 1 year since that mark, Puget saw AMD climb to over 50% of its total sales. Puget noted that Threadripper was also partly responsible for a big part of this uptick, and that makes sense. Puget's market tends to be more focused on professionals, and that would include users more likely to need HEDT components. And finally, some interesting manufacturing and industry news about GAAFETs. We've been talking about these in a couple of news videos lately, and mostly talking about how they're aiming to replace FinFETs in the next couple of years as shrinking process and interconnects get increasingly complicated. TSMC, Intel, and Samsung are all working on some version of GAAFET transistors, though Samsung recently previewed what's possible with its own multi-bridge channel FET, or MBC FET, which makes use of nanosheets. As a reminder, nanosheets are flexible in that they can be built either wide or narrow to augment the channel width, leading to either higher performing or lower power designs. At International Solid State Circuits Virtual Conference 2021, Samsung's vice president said that, quote, "We have used FinFET transistors for about a decade. However, at 3 nanometers, we're using a gate-all-around transistor." Samsung went on to say that the new GAAFET transistors will provide, quote, "high speed, low power, and small area." Again, the distinct advantage held by nanosheets is the flexibility of the WEF, or the width of the channel in a transistor. Samsung's research with nanosheets and potential next-generation SRAM, predominantly used for cache on CPUs, highlights this flexibility. Samsung used different width adjustments with SRAM in an effort to reduce the amount of voltage needed to switch the state of an SRAM cell. Quote, "SRAM's 6 transistors can be divided into 3 pairs: the pass gates, the pull-ups, and the pull-downs. In a FinFET design, the WEF of all 3 types would be equal, but with nanosheet devices, the Samsung team was free to make alterations. In one, they made the pass gates and the pull-downs wider. In another, they made the pass gate wider and the pull-down narrower. This was on IEEE Spectrum. The end result was that by using various channel widths afforded by nanosheets, Samsung was able to produce SRAM with a write margin of 230 millivolts less voltage. As we reported previously, Samsung plans to more widely incorporate its multi-bridge channel FET, or MBC FET, at 3 nanometers. So that's it for hardware news this week. As always, you can subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to pick up one of our mouse mats or our toolkits or other products. And you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to get some behind-the-scenes videos and additional Q&A videos. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.